This review is brought to you by Pringles.
It will haunt you every night. Whatever it is, no one should have to encounter that kind of evil. Except you girls, I think you can handle it.
Oh, good. Thanks.
Hello, and welcome to Film Rant. Well, Ghostbusters has gotten a lot of press over the past year or so, mostly to do with the cast selection and its comparisons to the original movies. I suppose when you watch this review you'll be expecting me to compare it to the old Bill Murray movies, and that's a perfectly fine assumption to make. Except, I haven't seen a Ghostbusters movie before this one. What? We do exist, you know. I mean, there are a few of us, but we all band together and live in a small settlement and talk about how we haven't seen Ghostbusters. Well, I decided to flee and go down to the local cinema to get on board with the Ghostbusters hype train, and I have to say, I think this was probably the wrong film to introduce myself to it. From here on out there will be spoilers, so don't continue past this point if you haven't seen the movie, but if you ain't afraid of no spoilers, then by all means, let's talk about this painful movie. First of all, the movie has a main cast of 6, and only 2 of them are actual characters. Those 2 would be Holtzman and Patty. That's not to say that they're good characters, by the way, I'm just saying they stand out from the rest. Holtzman is the quirky, random 80s inspired chick that seems to serve as the comic relief. Now, it's perfectly fine to have a character like this when they're written properly, like Luna Lovegood or April Ludgate, but Holtzman is just written so badly that most of her quirks just seem like an obvious effort from the writers to introduce something different into their movie, instead of simply coming across as believable features of the character. I mean, there's a scene where she randomly starts singing a song completely out of nowhere. It's not particularly funny as it runs on for far too long, and it doesn't serve any other purpose than to try and be random or funny. Holtzman stands out from the rest, but she's so poorly written she's not a particularly enjoyable character. Patty stands out as she's the loud, sassy woman. She has some pretty good lines, except that one from the trailer.
Okay, so I don't know if it was a race thing or a lady thing, but I'm mad as hell.
Ugh. That line made me think this was going to be Tumblr the movie, but I'm happy to say it wasn't. Patty is quite stereotypical. I mean, we've seen a sassy black woman character in many other films and TV shows over the years, but, you know, I enjoyed her. She was good fun, and Leslie Jones plays the character really well. Arguably the biggest pair of the quartet are Kristen Wiig and Melissa McCarthy's characters, who are Erin and Abby respectively. What can I say about these guys? I mean, really? Erin is a very driven and friendly person who wants to sort of lead the group. Abby is a very driven and friendly, if not forward person who sort of wants to lead the group. Erin can be quite silly and do dumb shit. Abby can be quite silly and do dumb shit. Noticing a pattern here? They're basically the same person, and one character could have played both roles easily. The only reason I think they're 2 different characters is because they're the only source of conflict within the group, and even that is short-lived after the first 40 minutes. I actually think that the only difference between them is that Erin fancies Chris Hemsworth and Abby doesn't. Speaking of Hemsworth, man, I love the guy, but he's just... I mean, I can't even put into words how annoying he is in this movie. I get that he's meant to be so incredibly stupid for comedy purposes, but I just have an irrational hatred of characters like that. Chris Pratt from Parks and Recreation Season 3 onwards is a good example. There is one character like that I enjoy though, and that's Brick Tamland from Anchorman. I don't know if it's because he's played by Steve Carell or if it's simply because he's better written and fits more in the universe he's in. Brick Tamland is dumb in a much more funnier and well-constructed way than Hemsworth is. His jokes are actually funny and not just base child humour. And I get that Ghostbusters is aimed at kids, but that doesn't mean that some jokes can't be a bit more thought out with better punchlines. The pinnacle of Hemsworth's comedy is that he can't answer phones or pronounce certain words properly. I mean, it's cringier than your old MySpace page. So the only cast member left is Neil Casey, who plays Rowan, the villain of the movie. What is there to say about this guy? Well, He's a loner, I guess, and he's been bullied most of his life, and his way of fixing that is to cleanse the world using ghosts. It's just too ordinary, man. We've seen that plotline in pretty much every movie ever. Change the fucking record. It's far too safe. Ghostbusters seemed like it wanted to challenge certain social issues with some of the choices it's made, and to go for such a black and white by-the-books pantomime villain is a little disappointing, even if it does fit in with the dumbed-down tone it seems to be attaching itself to. One thing I will say about this movie though is that it is absolutely hilarious if you're 5. The quality of comedy in this movie is so poor. I mean really, really poor. Maybe I'm just a right miserable twat, but there was only 1 or 2 moments where I actually exhaled air slightly faster than normal in some kind of stifled chuckle. It's to appeal to kids, I hear you saying. Is it though? Is it really? Given that one of the first jokes in the movie is a fart joke that's actually about queefing, I'm not so sure. Even if it is for kids, that doesn't mean it can't be decent, intelligent humour. The movie is pretty empty to start with, as it has absolutely nothing to say, so the humour was the only thing that it had, and even that was poor. You could argue that the movie doesn't say anything because, again, it's aimed for kids, but I disagree. I mean, look at Pixar movies. Their target audience is undoubtedly children, yet they still have me laughing and crying in equal measure, because they're actually well written. Ghostbusters is about as well written as a hillbilly suicide note, and it just seems totally uninspired. I understand that a lot of the humour is simply just goofy stuff like the kind you see in Seth Rogen films. In fact, I could very easily see some of the gags being said in Seth Rogen films, but the lines in those movies are usually delivered by a more comically able cast and are often said as a result of taking drugs. There's just something so desperate and forced about the comedy in Ghostbusters that it just doesn't seem natural, and personally, it barely got a chuckle out of me. Now, one of the big news stories about this movie was that the main characters were all gender switched. We see McCarthy, Wig, Jones and McKinnon take the main roles and Chris Hemsworth play the receptionist. This rubbed quite a few people up the wrong way so far that some people were flat out not going to watch the movie based on this single fact. I welcome the role change. I've got absolutely no issues with the female cast and Hemsworth being the receptionist. It's a good thing to gender reverse to challenge stereotypes and sexism in Hollywood. The only thing is that when you actually watch the movie, you notice that it challenges sexism with sexism. 2 wrongs don't make a right. All they had to do was change the genders to say its message. There, done. But instead, they made Hemsworth the male equivalent to the dumb blonde receptionist. I get that it's playful, but it just seems like it's trying too hard to say, look at us, we're reversing gender roles, woohoo! Apparently the receptionist in the original movies is nothing like Hemsworth's, which makes the decision to make him the way he is even more desperate. To add to this, in the credits we see a little few scenes where Holtzman's professor visits to look at her tech. She asks why there isn't a warning alarm in her gear, and Holtzman says, warning alarms are for dudes. Ugh, try harder, Ghostbusters, please, just a little effort. Ghostbusters really is a movie that tries far too hard and doesn't try at all. It's a very weird mix. Even amongst all this utter shite, there are a few sparks of awesome. There is a really great few moments near the end of the movie where the Ghostbusters are doing their thing and Holtzman whips out a pistol, licks them, then slides into battle and blasts a few fools into the netherworld with a few well-timed slides and jumps, all in slow-mo while the Ghostbusters theme is playing in the background. That was pretty fucking cool. That was the kind of fun I was looking for, just get in your face and show us some awesome shit. None of that childish shit a 2-year-old could outwit. Ultimately though, even with this small glimmer of hope, you can't roll the shit in glitter and say it's pretty. Another disappointing aspect of Ghostbusters is how basic the story is. Given the huge saturation of superhero movies over the past 10 years, Ghostbusters really doesn't stand out among the crop. I know Ghostbusters isn't a buddy superhero movie officially, but all the elements are there. A group of friends with some super gadgets taking down a generic villain that may or may not have supernatural powers. Now, a lot of these superhero movies could also face up to the same criticism I'm giving here, and rightly so. But Ghostbusters, I feel, could go a lot further afield from what is expected of it, I think. So it was disappointing to see such a mediocre story that doesn't really say anything. Again, you can argue it's simple so kids can understand it, and again, I'll throw Pixar right back at you. Inside Out was a great movie for kids and for adults. It had some wonderful messages in there and was chock full of little subtleties and commentaries that may go unnoticed until the 3rd or 4th time you watch it. Just because a movie is aimed at children doesn't mean it can't say something. I feel like at least one of the characters should have some mysterious element to them. Guardians of the Galaxy is a more recent buddy hero movie, and in many ways it's similar to Ghostbusters, at least in its setup and themes. That movie is vastly helped by Peter Quill's mysterious past, and we don't know who his father is. It's not something that's central to the film, but it at least gives you something to think about. Ghostbusters is just mindless, and that's fine if it's mindless fun, but it ain't really fun. It leaves you thinking about absolutely nothing. Possibly the worst moment of the movie comes from a healthy dose of product placement. Now, product placement is never subtle, but some studios do try to make it as subtle as possible. It never really works, but at least they try. Other studios will outright say it's product placement and deliver it in quite a slapstick manner and really draw attention to it, almost parodying the very idea of it, which is cool.
Compromising the integrity of the show to sell.
Wow, this is Diet Snapple?
I know, it tastes just like regular Snapple, doesn't it?
You should try pomegranate. It's amazing.
I only date guys who drink Snapple.
Look, we all love Snapple. Lord knows I do, but focus here.
I love it when movies do that. Ghostbusters falls somewhere in the middle. Early on in the movie, Holtzman wanders into a haunted building, and when she turns, I see something she's carrying. I turned to my buddy in the cinema and I said, Is that a can of Pringles? He looked at me confused. If that's all the product placement was, then hey, it's a bit forced, but I can let it slide. But oh no, it's so much worse than that. The basement door swings open and one of the characters says to Holtzman, "We're about to capture a ghost and you're standing there eating Pringles," or something like that. And she says something like, "Once you taste this crunchy goodness, you can't stop." Wow. I mean, Jesus. If you're going to do product placement, either make a complete mockery of it like this.
Call me. It's a personal transportable cellular telephone. It features 645 channel capacity, 10 number speed dial, and an electronic security lock. This revolution in communication could make it possible for more and more people to have a phone in their car.
Or at least try and place it in the film with some context other than just shoving it in there with as much grace as vigorously fisting a virgin. The last thing I'll say about the script is a small thing, but as a guy I feel I have to say it. Towards the end of the movie, the Busters have to blow up their car to seal a portal. Holtzman tells the group to aim for the reactor on the top, which is fairly small. Aim? Aim? You've seen how Ghostbusters guns work, right? The sort of shoot out in random directions like a bolt of lightning? I'm not entirely sure how you're meant to aim that. It's very nitpicky, but as a guy, I feel this needs to be mentioned. Danny McBride gets me.
Real fucking smart answer. Why don't you fucking aim, huh?
I have a particularly explosive ejaculate. It just goes everywhere. It's like a fucking wild fireman's hose. You just gotta grab on and pray to God it doesn't get in your eyes or your mouth.
From a technical standpoint, Ghostbusters has some very questionable editing. Some scenes are intercut without any real reason, and it can often be quite jarring jumping between two scenes that happen to be going on simultaneously while never interacting with each other. There's also some very strange tonal shifts. The movie starts with Gabe from the office going down into a haunted basement. There's a few jump scares which are the absolute pinnacle of terrible filmmaking, and we get the impression he's savagely turned to goo. It's a bit childishly presented, but it's still quite a dark opening in terms of what actually happens. Immediately after that scene, we jump to the obligatory aerial shots of Manhattan with the Ghostbusters theme blaring over the top. This happens throughout the movie. It goes from pretty dark, even horror-like scenes to light-hearted, daft, childish comedy scenes. Juxtaposition is cool when it's done right, but in Ghostbusters it's put together like advertising cheap gas rates at a Holocaust museum. All in all, I understand that Ghostbusters is just meant to be good, light-hearted fun, but that's still no excuse for it being a bad movie. I don't outright hate it, it's nothing offensive, and it's at least a film. You know, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's just that the comedy is so basic, the story matches it, and it doesn't really have any interesting characters. The villain is a bigger disappointment than my dad,
Hey, film rant. Hang on, that's my joke.
Sorry, my dad's actually lovely. But yeah, Ghostbusters really isn't a great movie. It's not put me off watching the older ones, I will get round to it at some point, but this movie was simply low quality, badly written shite. The whole movie just seems to be a complete lack of effort while also trying far too hard to be funny. Ghostbusters gets 2 frames out of 5. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Film Rant.
The ghost. Really?